Get in that car. Go back inside. Wait. You'll know why soon enough. She said it quietly. Not dramatic. Not like someone trying to get attention. Like someone delivering information they wish they didn't have. Her fingers were wrapped around a paper coffee cup, steam rising in the cold February air outside the Shoppers Drug Mart on Dundas. She was maybe 70, 75, wearing a long wool coat the color of charcoal, and she looked at me the way my grandmother used to look at me when she already knew how something was going to end. I almost kept walking. My name is Zara. I'm 31 years old. I'm a chartered professional accountant at a mid-sized firm in London, Ontario, and I have spent the better part of my adult life making decisions based on data, not feelings, and certainly not on warnings from strangers outside pharmacies. I believe in spreadsheets. I believe in documentation. I believe in evidence. I did not believe in this. But I stopped. My fiancé had texted me 20 minutes earlier asking me to meet him at his place. We were supposed to sit down with the prenuptial paperwork his family's lawyer had drawn up. His mother had been pushing for it for months, which had always made me uncomfortable in a way I couldn't quite name. My fiancé kept saying it was just a formality, protecting both of us. Standard stuff. I had been parked outside the Shoppers because I needed to pick up something for a headache I'd had since morning. I was already late. I was already slightly dreading the evening. And then this woman said those words to me, and I stood on that sidewalk in 12-degree cold, holding a plastic bag with Advil and a bottle of water, trying to decide if I was being ridiculous. I got back in my car. I sat there for maybe 3 minutes. Then, instead of turning left toward his place, I turned right and drove home. My apartment is on the 14th floor of a building near Victoria Park. It's mine. Bought it myself 2 years ago before we were even engaged. That had been another thing his mother found unusual. A woman my age, owning property on her own, before marriage. She'd said it the way some people say unusual things. With a smile, like a compliment, but with something underneath it. I let myself in, left the lights off, and stood at my kitchen window watching the city below. I told myself I'd give it an hour and then drive over. Apologize for being late. Blame the headache. Sign whatever needed signing and go home. At 7:40, my phone lit up. A text from my fiancé. Where are you? We're waiting, I stared at that word. He knew I was coming alone. At 7053, my building's front desk called up. There was a man at the entrance asking to be let up. My fiancé. I told the concierge to let him in, then immediately second-guessed it. Then thought of the old woman's face. Then told myself I was being paranoid. He knocked instead of using his key. That should have meant nothing. Instead it meant everything, though I wouldn't understand why until later. I opened the door. He looked fine. Composed. The kind of composed that takes effort. He was wearing the gray sweater I'd bought him for his birthday. And he smiled at me, and for a second I almost forgot the last 40 minutes. You feeling okay? He asked. You look pale. I said my head hurt. He said we should reschedule, that his parents' lawyer could come another time, that I shouldn't stress. He was warm, attentive. The version of him I fell in love with 3 years ago at a mutual friend's housewarming party, standing by the window arguing pleasantly about whether Toronto or Montreal had better food, and I'd said neither because I was from London and that was objectively funnier in context. He stayed for maybe 40 minutes, made me tea, sat on my couch. At some point he asked casually if I'd had a chance to look over the investment account documents his business partner had sent over. I said I hadn't. He said no rush, just whenever. After he left, I opened my laptop. I'm an accountant. Looking at documents is not something I do casually. It's something I do the way a surgeon looks at an X-ray. Methodically, looking for what's wrong before assuming anything is right. His business partner had sent me a 12-page document 6 days ago. I had skimmed it once, flagged it to read properly, and then let it sit in my downloads folder. Now I opened it and read every line. It was a joint investment structure. My fiancé and I as co-signatories. Pooled assets. A clause buried on page 9 in language that was technically clear but practically invisible unless you were looking for it, in the event of dissolution of the partnership, which included, and I had to read this 3 times, dissolution by death of one signatory. The surviving partner held full administrative authority over all shared assets, with a 6-month freeze period before any estate review. 6 months, during which everything would be under his control. I sat back in my chair. I'm an accountant. I see structures like this sometimes in estate files. They're not inherently illegal, but they require informed consent. Real informed consent, not the kind where someone explains it to you over dinner and says it's just the standard wording. Don't worry about it. I read the document a second time. Then I opened the email thread and looked at who else had been CC'd. His mother. She had been CC'd on the original draft. She had been CC'd on the revision. Her name was on the approval chain. I thought about the prenuptial paperwork waiting at his parents' house, about the joint account he'd been gently nudging me toward for 4 months, about the conversation 3 weeks ago where he'd mentioned, just in passing, that it might make sense to sell my apartment after the wedding, pool everything, simplify, about the life insurance policy update I'd signed in December. He'd brought the form over himself. Said our broker recommended updating it before the wedding. About the woman outside Shoppers Drug Mart. Don't get in that car. I got up, poured the tea down the sink, went to my filing cabinet, actual physical files, because I'm the kind of person my colleagues find slightly intense, and pulled every document he had ever asked me to sign. The insurance update, the investment account application, 2 forms related to a property holding company he'd invited me to join, which I had thought at the time was him including me in his business life. I spread them across my kitchen table and spent the next 2 hours going through each one. What I found wasn't a crime. Not cleanly, but it was a pattern, a careful, patient, thoughtful pattern of positioning. Over 18 months, I had been moved, document by document, into a structure where a significant portion of my assets, my savings, my apartment equity if I sold it, my insurance payout, would flow toward him in specific circumstances. Circumstances like my death. I didn't cry. I want to say that was strength, but honestly it was more like the feeling hadn't landed yet. I was still in analyst mode. Still in the part of my brain that makes lists. I made a list. At 11:15 p.m., I called my closest friend. We've known each other since first year at Western. She's now a family lawyer in Kitchener. And I read her the clause on page 9. There was a silence on the phone. Where did you get this? She asked. I told her. Another silence. Zara, she said, this is not standard wording. I knew that. I had suspected that. But hearing her say it out loud made my hands go very still on the table. She talked me through what to do. Not in a dramatic way, not in a panicked way, in the way she talks when she's helping a client. Calm, sequential, practical. First step, second step, third step. At 1:30 a.m., I sent an email to my own lawyer, someone I'd used for my condo purchase and kept in my contacts ever since, with a subject line that said urgent, prenuptial and investment documents. Please review before Wednesday. I attached everything. At 2005 a.m., I logged into the joint investment account portal with my own login, which I had set up and then, I'll admit, mostly ignored. I put a hold on the pending transfer authorization I hadn't known was pending. $40,000, scheduled for the following Friday, moving from the account into a holding fund under his business name only. I stared at that for a long time. Then I screenshotted it, saved it in 3 places, emailed it to myself from a secondary account he didn't know about, an old university email I'd never closed. The kind of thing you keep around and never think about until you need it. At 3:20 a.m., I wrote a short email to the insurance provider. I requested a temporary freeze on the beneficiary designation change that had been processed in December, citing a potential authorization dispute. I kept the language formal and precise. I knew which words would flag the file for human review. At 6:25 a.m., I sent my fiancé a text. Head is worse. going to work from home today. Can we push the lawyer meeting to next week? He responded in 4 minutes. Of course, feel better. Love you. Love you. After 18 months of paperwork, I read it twice and felt something I couldn't quite name. Not anger yet, not grief yet. Something more like the view from a very high place. At 9 a.m., I was on a call with my lawyer. She'd read everything overnight. When she spoke, her voice was level and careful in the way that means she's choosing words deliberately. The investment clause is aggressive, she said. The insurance timing is concerning. I'd want to talk to you in person today if possible. We met at noon. She brought a colleague who handles financial fraud cases. He was quiet, methodical, and asked me questions in a sequence that told me he already understood the shape of what I was describing. I showed them the transfer, the timeline of documents, the insurance form. The colleague said, "The hold you placed this morning was the right call." He explained what would come next, in terms I already understood, but needed to hear from someone else. The transfer authorization would be flagged for review by the institution's compliance department. The insurance freeze would trigger a file audit. My lawyer would file formal notice that I was disputing the prenuptial terms, which would effectively pause any proceedings until the dispute was resolved. None of this would feel satisfying yet, but all of it would matter later. I drove home at 2:30, sat in my car for a few minutes in the underground parking garage, in the dark and the cold that seeps into parkades in February, and I let myself feel it for the first time. Not the legal situation. Him. 3 years. The housewarming party. The way he'd texted me the morning after our first date, not playing it cool, just saying he'd had a good time and wanted to do it again. The weekend we'd driven up to Tuppermory and got caught in the rain and ate terrible fish and chips in the car with the windows fogging up, and laughed about it for weeks after. The night I'd told him I loved him, standing in his kitchen at midnight, and he'd looked at me like he'd been waiting for me to say it. I sat with all of that. Let it be real, let it have been real, and let it also be true that something had happened to it, or inside of it, or underneath it, and I hadn't seen it. Then I went upstairs. At 4:17 p.m. he called. I let it go to voicemail. At 4:19 he texted, "Hey, just checking in. How's the head?" At 5:52 he texted again. "Did you look at the investment stuff yet? No rush, just want to make sure you're not stressed about it." At 6:44, "Call me when you get a chance." At 7:30, my buzzer went. I looked at the camera feed on the concierge app. Him. Standing at the front entrance with his hands in his jacket pockets, shoulders slightly up, the posture of someone pretending to be more relaxed than they are. This time I didn't let him up. I texted, "Hey, not feeling up to visitors. Talk tomorrow." A pause, 3 dots appearing and disappearing twice. "Sure," he finally wrote. "Hope you feel better." The next morning, my lawyer called to tell me that the compliance department at the investment firm had formally opened a review. The transfer was frozen. His access to initiate further transactions on the joint account had been suspended pending the outcome. She also told me that his lawyer, the same one who had supposedly drawn up our mutual prenuptial agreement, had called her office that morning, which meant he already knew something had shifted, which meant his lawyer was the same lawyer, which meant the prenuptial agreement had never been mutual in any real sense. I hadn't known that was possible. My lawyer told me it happened more than people realized. At 11 a.m., he called 4 times in a row. I answered the 4th one. He sounded different. The composure was still there, but it was thinner, like a coat with the lining starting to come loose. "I heard from my lawyer," he said. "What's going on?" I said I'd had some questions about the documents, and had asked my own lawyer to review them. "Your own lawyer?" A beat. "I thought we were using—" "I know," I said. "I wanted an independent opinion." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Zara, we should talk in person. I think there's been a misunderstanding." I said I agreed we should talk. I suggested somewhere public. He suggested his parents' place. I suggested the Tim Hortons near my office, which is on a corner with large windows and always has people in it. He said fine. We met at 2 p.m. He was already there when I arrived, sitting with the coffee he wasn't drinking, wearing an expression I'd never seen on him before, contained but effortful, like someone holding a door closed from the inside. I sat down across from him and waited. The investment structure, he started, is just how the account is set up. It's not, he paused. It doesn't mean what you think it means. I asked him what he thought I thought it meant. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he said the prenuptial agreement was designed to protect both of us, that his parents had been the ones who wanted it, that he thought having their lawyer handle it would be simpler, that he hadn't realized it might look a certain way. I asked him, "What way does it look?" He looked at his coffee, then at me, then past me, at the window. "I love you," he said. "That hasn't changed." I said, "I know you do." Because I believed that, still, in some form. I don't think what he felt for me wasn't real. I think things that are real can still become something else. I think a person can love you and also, separately, make decisions about your future as though you're a variable in a spreadsheet, rather than a person sitting across from them in a Tim Hortons in February. I said, "The transfer that was scheduled for Friday, the 40,000. Where was it going?" He looked at me. "I would have told you about it," he said. "When?" He didn't answer. We sat there for a while. Around us, people were ordering coffees and eating muffins and having entirely normal conversations, and the fluorescent light was doing what fluorescent light does in the winter, which is make everyone look slightly tired and real. I said, "I'm not going to make a decision today. My lawyer is reviewing everything. The compliance review is ongoing. I need some time." He nodded. He looked, for the first time since I'd known him, genuinely unsure of what to say next. I gathered my coat and my bag and I left him there. My lawyer called 3 days later. The compliance review had found irregularities in the beneficiary update processing, specifically, that the form I'd signed had been submitted with additions that hadn't been present when I signed it. It was a small change, significant in practice. She also told me that the prenuptial agreement, as drafted, would have been unlikely to hold up in an Ontario court regardless, given the clear conflict of interest in shared legal representation. But that didn't make it less of an attempt. I asked her what she thought the intent had been. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said she thought the intent had been to create a situation where, if something happened to me, the path of least resistance led entirely to him. I thought about the woman outside the Shoppers Drug Mart, her paper coffee cup and her wool coat, and the particular way she'd looked at me. Not with pity, not with drama, with the flat certainty of someone who has seen how stories like this go. I never saw her again. I've been back to that Shoppers, maybe a dozen times since, out of habit if nothing else. She's never been there. I don't know who she was. I'm an accountant. I don't believe in things I can't verify. But I also know that if I had gotten in my car that night and driven to his parents' house and signed those papers and handed over that version of my future, I would have had no idea what I had agreed to until it was too late to matter. I listened to a stranger on a cold sidewalk in February instead, and I still have my apartment, I still have my savings. I still have every document in my filing cabinet, organized the way I've always organized them, in color-coded folders that my colleagues find slightly intense. And I have the question I'll probably carry for a long time, the one without a clean answer. Did she know about the paperwork, or did she know about something worse? Either way, I went home,